live or?
Okay, so this is live. We've got Gary on the other side. He's a little fuzzy when we blow him up to the full screen. But Gary, can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Excellent. So my one request for the council is if you'll speak directly into your microphones as you speak with Gary. We practiced this a little bit in our test call, but we found it works best if you're speaking very close to the microphone. We did let Gary know that what the council is used to hearing is a brief presentation from the staff member who's giving that update. In this case, that's going to be Gary. And then he will be ready to answer your questions. I'll be in the front row if you have more questions, but I'm going to turn it over to Gary Rapp with LR Kimball.
Thank you. We've done a review of the work done to date by your staff and found that the vast majority of the work that's been completed has been quite successful. The single problem appears to be related to problems with having street intersections validate to the satisfaction of the Dunwoody staff. This does not happen with regular addresses, but only with intersections. We found that this is not based on the changes in programming as was being investigated by your staff, but actually appears to be due to a difference in the data being held by the Checkcom and the Interact 911 databases. One is based on a coordinate system, one is based on a database. The database being used by DeKalb actually has additional information that was not anticipated, and it will actually list 4 separate locations for a single intersection. That's causing problems because only one intersection is coming across, so your staff has to spend the time to determine which intersection coordinate is the appropriate one. We're now working with staff to determine if the additional information is actually necessary. If it is, we will work to get that information brought across. If it is not, we will work on the situation to determine how it can be stripped and presented to your local CAD system in an appropriate fashion.
Okay, so to interject myself here, so this is kind of the analysis of where we are today. And at this point, unless Gary has more to add, we're ready to answer questions from the council.
I'd just like to add that staff has given me sufficient information and has kept sufficient logs that we were able to find this information. And there were actually a couple of problems that were imitating each other. So we finally got it down to figuring out exactly what the problem is and can now work forward on it.
Hey Gary, how you doing? It's Denny Shortle here. As you're looking at the overall situation with the CAD2CAD, do you see that it is feasible of doing this, and not only now but over the long term?
Yes, it is. We're down to one problem of intersection identification, and we're talking about something that can be confined in a box, 80 by 80 feet or 100 by 100 feet. It's just that one system is looking at that as 4 different locations. To be honest, in my history of dealing with 911 calls, I found that the information being called in is generally vague to begin with, and I'm not certain that we're producing a level of specificity in the 911 call that's not required by your personnel. So we're looking at 2 ways. One, can we safely ignore the additional information and simply look at it as a single point? Or if it is required, working with OSSI and Interact to get it across. But I think it is a solvable issue.
Just a follow-up on that, if it's required, correcting, not just accepting what we have, but correcting, do you have any kind of a timeline in mind?
Yes, I think it could be done within a couple dozen hours of programming time, but finding the time for that, I don't know what the schedule is, but I would say that we're talking a few weeks rather than a few months.
Thank you very much.
John?
Hello, Gary. John Hennigan. Can you tell me about duplicative intersections that may appear more than once and how that's going to be fixed? In other words, Ashford, Dunwoody, and Perimeter Center East.
Approximately 20 intersections Kimberly actually supplied a map, which you can probably supply to you fairly easily, in which streets actually loop back. So you'll actually have two intersections with exactly the same name. That is a secondary problem, but it can be resolved since we can specifically identify them. And looking at it in terms of overall content, the number of calls that would be used for these particular intersections in the space of the year, even if the dispatcher did spend a few seconds to validate them, it might not be worth fixing as much as knowing that they're there due to the small number available in your city. But we are looking at a couple of different items that have almost the same terminology. When we're looking at a specific intersection, it will actually list up to 4 different ways based on odd or even portions of the address. It's being referred to as duplicate, but there are actually duplicate intersections because they curve back, so you'll actually have 2 intersections with exactly the same name, and they can only be identified by local landmarks or closest cross streets. I'm trying to solve the big 95% problem right now, but I think that will go a long way to fixing the duplicate street issues also.
Thank you.
Kimberly, it's only 20 because there are 6 intersections in my neighborhood alone.
I'd be happy to send you a map
that would
that actually points them all.
Okay. The intersection issue, to me, I'm surprised that it's not a bigger issue, because if someone sees a wreck at the intersection of Chamblee, Dunwoody, and Mount Vernon, isn't that what they phone in generally? Because they don't have a street address? I don't know if you heard me.
That came across a little muffled.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I believe you said that could you repeat that for me?
Yeah. So is it not, when most people see a wreck on, say, on surface streets, don't they generally call it in by the streets as opposed to the home address or the business address? So they say
street addresses are not an issue. We're talking mostly intersections here.
No, I understand that. What I'm asking, though, is that I would think that most calls about vehicular accidents are related, people use cross streets to identify them. They use intersections. That's what I would think, and so I would think this is a big fix. In other words, I don't think it's something we can ignore.
So this is, if I could interject, it's certainly something that we're not trying to ignore or minimize, but from reviewing the call logs of transferred calls that go from DeKalb, or from Chatcom to DeKalb every month since we started this process, calls phoned in for intersections actually make up a very, very small percentage. More of them are tied to physical addresses, but it remains to be a very important project, or important aspect for our project.
I guess on that question, when you call in the Chamblee, Dunwoody, Mount Vernon, one system pops a pinpoint, let's say in the middle of the intersection, the other one pops up the 4 corners, and you don't know which corner. If it's an automobile accident, you don't really care about which corner. You're going right there anyway.
Right.
So I'm thinking that's what they're thinking, where they don't need that duplicative information or the additional information for the intersection because it gets there anyway. The problem I only have is on those small number of streets that loop around or have the duplicative or in nature. How do you fix that? And I don't have the answer. That's why I'm looking to the experts.
The way to fix the duplicate is that you can associate them with the nearest cross street. If someone were to call in a duplicate name, the dispatcher can be trained to ask what is the nearest cross street. That can then be associated with the choice of the 2 streets. If there are no identifying landmarks, or if the people are simply not aware or can supply no other ways of dealing with it, it is a possibility that your dispatcher will get both locations and choose from a pick list. But in that situation, your personnel will be showing up within a couple of 100 feet no matter what. But that would be the perfect storm of a person unfamiliar with the locale, unfamiliar with the cross street, unfamiliar with landmarks, being able to give no other secondary information.
Gary, I have one more question. When it comes to a 911 call on a cell phone, is the GIS coordinate of the cell phone caller also sent?
Yes, now that is something that is based on your vendor, but it's generally being given across based on the sophistication, either an XY coordinate if the phone can supply that, or the nearest cell tower and cell tower cross-reference, and it is coming across as a coordinate. Yes.
Could that be then used to help pick which of those two duplicative intersections might come to play?
Yes, but the issue is it can be done such as at CAD2CAD, but when the information is coming across, we have to make sure that that information is being sent across and it can be read by the database that is being used by Interact 911. Because Interact 911 is using a database of streets, while CAD2CAD is using the coordinate system. It can be done, the information can be associated, but that is the 10% problem rather than 90% problem. I do not see a problem with it being addressed, but we have to recognize that they are two separate issues.
All right, thank you.
Hey Gary, this is Terry Nall. Thank you again for your service. You mentioned the 24 or so hours of programming, let's call it 25 hours of programming. Who does that? Is that programming on the OSSI side, CAD2CAD side? Is that programming on the Interact CAD side? Is it on both sides?
It would depend on what answer is revealed. If, for example, your emergency services determined that they did not need to know which quarter of the intersection it was on, it would simply be a Interact 911 to have the data coming across to simply set a policy to choose one of their potential choices because they will all equal the same intersection. Now, there are run or activity policies associated with showing up at a particular corner. It may very well be that that one corner, if everything is going well, will have one station respond to it as opposed to the other corner. But we're checking with your personnel to see if that's absolutely necessary. If they are simply satisfied with getting to the intersection, the programming would be wholly on the part of Interact 911, and it would simply be a decision tree to say, any of these four choices are satisfactory, we're going to do a rule that says send them to the first one. So that would be a relatively insignificant programming effort. On the other hand, if we had to go ahead and activate the field, which is not currently being used for the purposes of cross streets, which is a mandated known field, it would take a little more effort and it would be on the part of OSSI to send it in the first place. So depending on what answer is done, it will depend on who does the programming.
So for us, from an oversight perspective, how will we know who to do the work? How will we know?
Ashley and Kimberly are reviewing that right now with your staff, and we're hoping for an answer from your emergency services responders. We're hoping for a response soon. They should be able to give you the better idea of when that response will be coming back.
Thank you.
That makes sense. Jim Reitiger, yeah, so this really boils down to its simplest, which, you know, it's going to depend on the answer from our emergency responders, but at its simplest, for 95% of the cases, depending on which way you're going programmatically, this is a 4-to-1, 1-to-4 mapping issue. You either pick one of the four intersections if you're going, one of the 4 points if you're going from one system to the other, or 4 go to one in the other direction, and that's that. Do I have that correctly?
Yes, and they're all the same intersection. They're
Right,
all within
right.
the bounds of the same intersection. You can stand with one foot, literally, if you're in the middle of the street, touching all four.
Right, right. Okay. Yeah, wow, that could be really simple as long as our police, fire, and EMS don't really care about which corner, and I just doubt we get that kind of detail with most 911 calls in any case.
I actually have 20 years of field experience, and I have found that 911 calls can be off by quite a distance, up to several intersections or portion of a mile away. So I do not, and my recommendation to actually in Kimberly on this is that we might be adding such a specific response to something that is a general call in the first place, that's why I'm pushing for checking with your emergency service personnel. That's what I've been pressing for.
Okay, thank you. That's what I thought, and yeah, I concur. You know, just because you can do everything to 10 decimal places with a computer doesn't mean you necessarily should, and I think this is a great example of that. Thank you.
You're welcome, sir.
Gary, this is Mike Davis. I've got just one issue. I see this, you know, we have 20 intersections that are in play here, but I think, Lynn, I dare say that of the 6 that are in your neighborhood, there's probably never been an accident in any of them.
Right.
We only probably have 2 intersections that are actually in play here, where, you know, we have high-speed traffic going in multiple directions. We're talking mostly about neighborhood streets that wrap around and come back on the same street.
Yeah, right.
So I don't think we have as big a problem as we're talking about here. You know, even if on the rare occasion we have an accident at one of those cross streets in your neighborhood, it's not like it's, you know, we couldn't find them so we went home. We'll go to the other one.
What do they do now?
That is a potential, sir. We're talking about the situation of how many calls per year would be impacted by the inability to solve the dual intersection problem. And because if a call comes over like that, the fallback position is for your dispatcher. They'll get 2 locations coming up on the screen, and then they can choose one. So you're talking about a timeliness issue of 5 to 10 seconds to respond to this. If the number of calls per year is in single digits, it is, and I'm giving my opinion here, it would have to be reviewed by your own staff. It might be more effort to solve the issue than is warranted in the space of the year.
Okay. Anybody else? Okay. All right, thanks. That's exactly what I was looking for. Just you know, what does it cost to get that one last decimal point, as Jim says? You know, is it worth the trouble? All right, thanks.
Thank you. And Kimberly had already taken points to point out that most of the locations were in low volume areas, which is why I feel comfortable in making that type of observation.
Okay, well, if it pleases the mayor and council, Ashley and I will continue to work with Gary as we work with the CAD to find out this necessary information to allow us to make the programming changes necessary to complete this project. I do not anticipate we will have a firm update for you in 2 weeks, so if it pleases you, I'll aim to bring this back in September, or if you'd rather just wait until we have the issue resolved.
No.
And no, it sounds like a September. Okay, we'll have this back for your September work session. All right. Gary, do you have anything else for the council to consider today?
No, thank you very much. I appreciate your talking with me.
All right.
Thanks, Gary. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you very much.
So, is it SoCal?
All right, we've got marching orders for you then, Kimberly, so let's move on to the next item.